My own sister-in-law tried to destroy my family, but I turned it around. I've never been one to expose my life, much less on the internet. But there comes a time when we need to let go of that weight, you know? I experienced something that destroyed me inside for a while, made me doubt everything and everyone. And if I'm here writing this, it's because I managed to get out of that hole. Not completely, but with enough strength to not go back. I'm Valeria. I've always considered myself a balanced, sensible, family-oriented person. I had my husband Claudio, 2 beautiful children, an organized life. I trusted my intuition. But what I experienced proved to me that danger doesn't always come from where we imagine. Sometimes it's right there, smiling, pretending to care for us. I'm talking about Clara, my sister-in-law. For a long time, I saw her as someone admirable, always present, helpful, well spoken of by everyone. I never imagined what she was capable of, and everything began to fall apart one random Sunday when a phrase my mother said made me see everything with new eyes. It was there, at that family lunch, that my penny began to drop. It was a warm Sunday, the kind where you set the table on the porch and gather the whole family mess together. Claudio was excited. My mother, Raquel, had made that rice with pequi that only she knew how to make. Clara arrived late, as always, laden with bags and smiles. She sat across from me and started asking about the boys, their school, my work routine. Everything was normal. But at some point, my mother looked at me, then at Clara, and blurted out, somewhat unintentionally, "Have you ever noticed how everything in her life revolves around you?" I laughed at first, not quite understanding. But then, that sentence stuck with me. I began to notice small details. Clara always knew everything about my life. Sometimes, even before I told her. She'd weigh in on my decisions, subtly criticize my choices, and make a point of reminding me of everything she'd done for me. And worst of all, Claudio didn't see a thing. On the contrary, she seemed increasingly dependent on her sister, as if she were the center of reason and I was the exaggerated one. In the days that followed, I started paying more attention. Clara called every single day. If I took a while to answer, she'd text Claudio to ask if I was okay. Sometimes she'd call the boys to ask if I was stressed, if I'd yelled at them. I began to realize she was building a picture of me as an unstable person, always with that sweet demeanor, so no one would suspect. I pieced it together piece by piece. One day, I came home from work and saw my mother-in-law sitting with Claudio, speaking softly, worried. When I walked in, they quickly changed the subject. The next day, I found out Clara had said I was taking over-the-counter medication and that I was on edge. I was shocked. I'd never taken anything other than a regular painkiller. I felt such rage, but at the same time, an absurd sense of helplessness. It was as if she were digging a hole beneath my feet, and I only realized it when I was already falling. The worst part was when I realized my marriage was starting to fall apart because of it. Claudio started acting differently around me. He questioned everything. "Why did you talk to the boys like that? Are you sure you're really okay? Don't you want to talk to someone?" I swear I tried to remain calm, but there came a point when I exploded. I screamed. I cried. I begged him to stop listening to everything his sister said. He denied it. He said it was just worry, but his gaze had changed. He viewed me with suspicion, and that hurt more than anything else. The man I slept with, the father of my children, was starting to doubt my sanity because of his sister's manipulations. I was ashamed to even admit it to anyone. Who would believe that a sister-in-law, so beloved by everyone, was slowly destroying me? It seemed all in my head, and that was exactly what she wanted everyone to think. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I woke up to my oldest son, crying in the bathroom. I ran in, thinking he'd hurt himself, but all he kept saying was, "Auntie said you're leaving home, that you're sick, that we're going to live with Daddy." My 8-year-old son was panicking over something that had never come out of my mouth. Clara had planted it in his head. I was shaking all over. I grabbed my phone, called her, and the only thing she replied was, "I only said what was necessary. You need help, Valeria, don't you see?" I hung up, unable to speak. There, in the middle of the bathroom, hugging my son, I cried like a child. That's when I understood. She wanted to take me out of the picture, to paint me as a threat, unstable, and worst of all, she was succeeding. That night, after the kids were asleep, I faced Claudio head-on. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just asked, "Do you trust me?" He took a moment to answer. It was like being slapped. He looked away and said, "I only want the best for all of us." That killed me inside. The realization sank in. He didn't trust me anymore. Clara had won. She'd managed to turn my husband against me, and I was alone. For the first time, I felt like disappearing, taking the kids and leaving. But I knew if I did, she'd use it against me. She'd say I'd run away, that I'd proven everything she'd said. So I bit back my tears and went to sleep. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew I couldn't wait for anyone to save me anymore. I'd have to turn this around myself. The next day, I went to my mother's house. Raquel had always been my safe haven, but I avoided worrying her about such things. But now it was different. When I told her everything, she was silent for a while. Then she spoke with a firmness I hadn't expected. "That woman always seemed fake to me, but you didn't want to see it. Now that you've seen it, you'll have to act." And that's what I did. The first thing I did was stop trusting anyone. I stopped sharing my life, stopped justifying my actions. I started recording conversations, messages, everything. I made a point of showing Claudio I wasn't crazy. I showed him screenshots, audio recordings, even conversations with the boys. He was reluctant, of course, but he started to notice. Little by little, he started connecting the dots, and the more he saw it, the more shocked he became. But the process was painful. Clara wouldn't stop. She discovered I was pulling away and began attacking me from other angles. She began approaching the mothers at school, telling them I left the children alone for too long, that I was always tired, that I couldn't handle it, until one of them, a friend of mine, came to warn me. The shame I felt was indescribable. She was tarnishing my image. I began to doubt myself. There were days when I woke up feeling exhausted, thinking maybe she was right, that I really was a bad mother, an out-of-control wife. But then I remembered the look on my children's faces, their hugs, how much they sought me out when they were sad, and that gave me strength. It was during this period that Nusa truly appeared in my life, an old friend whom I had distanced myself from because of the routine. She noticed my fatigue, my sadness, and began to listen to me without judgment. Nusa was essential. She listened to me patiently, reminded me of who I was. She helped me organize my thoughts, put together a plan, and most importantly, she made me feel like I wasn't alone. It was with her that I came up with the idea to start writing everything down. Dates, situations, even changes in the boys' behavior. I needed proof. Clara was clever, manipulative, and knew how to hide things well. But no one can keep up a mask for so long. And little by little, the cracks began to appear. One day, her son, Cesar, came to me. He had overheard his mother talking to his aunt on the phone and was upset. He said he didn't understand why she spoke ill of me when I'd always been good to them. That struck a chord with me. Cesar was a teenager, but he already had a sense of justice, and he too was beginning to see his mother for who she really was. It was with his help that I found the missing piece. Cesar gave me an audio recording, accidentally recorded, in which Clara clearly said that Valeria needs to fall before she ruins everything. It was like a punch in the gut, but at the same time, confirmation that I wasn't crazy. I showed the audio to Claudio. He listened in silence, pale. When it was over, he said nothing. He just left the house and went straight to talk to his sister. He returned hours later, devastated. He said he couldn't believe it, that the woman who raised him, who cared for him after their mother's death, was capable of such a thing. I said nothing. This wasn't the time for "I told you so." It was time to breathe and protect my family. And that's what I did. From that moment on, Clara lost control. She tried to turn everything around, as always. She said the audio was taken out of context, that Cesar was being manipulated by me. But no one believed her anymore. Even her husband started to distance himself. The lies began to surface. Old things, things no one had paid attention to before, began to make sense. And the more she tried to defend herself, the more she got into trouble. She lost allies, support, until one day, she lost her footing. Her husband filed for divorce. Her youngest son started refusing visits. And worst of all, my father-in-law, who had always been neutral, said he no longer wanted contact with her. And it was there, seeing her alone, isolated, that I understood the true weight of the choices we make. But even with all this, I felt no pleasure in her downfall. I felt no victory. I just wanted peace, and I started to have it. My marriage took time to rebuild. Broken trust doesn't come back overnight. But Claudio was willing. He apologized, not with empty words, but with action. He began to listen more, to trust me again. And I also needed to learn to forgive, not for him, for myself, because I didn't want to live the rest of my life distrusting everything. And most importantly, because my children deserved a healthy home. Today, they're smiling without fear again. I'm back to being the mother I was, the woman I hid for fear of going crazy. One day, months later, I sat on the couch with my mother and I realized I had survived. Raquel looked at me and said, "You're back, my daughter. I missed you." And I cried. I cried with relief, of having been through hell and still being here, of not letting anyone define me, of having overcome the silence, the fear, the shame. Because yes, we feel shame, of having trusted too much, of having been made fools of. But it passes, and what remains is the strength we didn't even know we had. This story still echoes within me, but today, it no longer dominates me. Today, I tell it to whoever needs to hear it. You're not crazy. And if you are, it's because they tried to drive you crazy. But you can get out. You can breathe again. Of course, there are still difficult days. Sometimes I find myself remembering specific moments and getting angry. Other times, I feel deeply sad, but that no longer defines me. Today, I know what I saw, what I lived, and how much it took to tear myself apart to rebuild myself. Clara is still far away. She tried to get closer a few times with ready-made excuses, but I was firm. I told her she was no longer part of my life, and honestly, I feel sorry. Because someone who needs to destroy another to feel in control doesn't know what love is, and she lost everything. I almost lost it too, but I found something she never had: true support. And that's worth more than any pretty image. If I could go back in time, would I have realized it sooner? Maybe. But I don't blame myself anymore. I've learned. And that's enough. If you're reading this and identify with any of it, listen to what I'm going to tell you. Pay attention to the little signs. That annoyance that seems silly. That comment that seems like concern but is actually poisonous. And most importantly, trust who you are. Don't let anyone steal that from you. It took me a while to look in the mirror and recognize the woman I am. But today, she's here, and she'll stay. After everything was over, I needed some time alone. Not to escape, but to reconnect. I went to Nusa's house for a few days, took a notebook, turned off my phone, and wrote down everything I'd experienced, in my own way, in my own words. It was therapeutic. It was as if I were cleansing my soul, peeling away layer by layer of the dirt Clara left behind. And for the first time, without fear of what people would think, without trying to appear strong all the time. I cried a lot while writing. I saw myself as fragile, but also brave. I realized that courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about carrying on despite it. I came home a different person, stronger. My children noticed. So did Claudio. I was no longer the woman who swallowed everything to maintain peace. I was the woman who knew her limits and knew how to say no without guilt. For a long time, I carried the guilt of having allowed all of that to happen. I thought, how did I not see it sooner? How did I let it get to this point? But the truth is, manipulation happens slowly. It's a subtle web, made of looks, silences, gestures disguised as affection. And when you realize it, you're already trapped. And to get out, you have to hurt yourself. Break up. And that hurts. But it hurts less than continuing to pretend everything's okay. Today I understand that I wasn't weak. I was deceived. And there's a huge difference between one thing and the other. People like to judge from the outside, without experiencing it. They say it's an exaggeration, that we see too much. But those who experience it know. They know what it's like to feel crazy. They know what it's like to doubt themselves. And they also know the strength it takes to get back up. The relationship with Claudio still goes through ups and downs. Rebuilding trust after so many fractures isn't easy. But we're trying. He's changed a lot. He's shown a willingness to listen, to see beyond what seems obvious. He started therapy. So have I. And that was a turning point. Speaking out, without fear of judgment, freed me. I uncovered old traumas, insecurities that made me seek too much validation from others, including Clara herself. I admired her so much because deep down, I thought I'd never be like her. Today, I see that I don't need to be like anyone else. Being me is enough. And that's no small thing. There was a moment during one of my therapy sessions when the psychologist asked me, if someone else were telling your story, what would you say to them? I stopped, thought, and replied, I would tell them they were very strong, that they didn't deserve to go through that they did the best they could. And then I realized I was talking about myself, and for the first time, I felt compassion for myself. Not pity, not compassion, but affection, as if I were embracing the exhausted woman I once was. And that was transformative. I became kinder to myself. I began to demand less of myself. I celebrated the small victories of the day. The boys are fine. It took a while for them to feel completely safe again. But today, when I see them playing, laughing loudly, hugging me out of the blue, I understand that it was worth the fight. I almost gave up, but I didn't give up on them. And they didn't give up on me either. They don't understand everything that happened, of course. But they feel that the house is light, that their mother is present, strong, loving. And that, for me, is already a huge victory. I don't want them to grow up afraid or with doubts about what a healthy relationship is. I want them to know how to recognize what's good and what's unhealthy. And the only way to teach this is by living honestly with them and with myself. Today, my priority is my mental health. I wake up and make a point of taking some time for myself. Even if it's just 15 minutes of silence, breathing, and a leisurely cup of hot coffee. I've learned to say no without over-explaining, to cut ties without guilt, to leave places that hurt me, even if they have long-standing ties. Clara was one of those ties. For a long time, I thought cutting ties with her was like breaking up with Claudio, with his family. But today I know that one thing doesn't need to be tied to the other. I can maintain my integrity without sacrificing myself. I can love Claudio and admit that his sister hurt me deeply. And that's okay. Everyone has their own story, their own choices, their own consequences. Many people walked away during this process. People who preferred to believe Clara's version, or who simply didn't want to get involved. At first, it hurt me. I felt betrayed, disposable. But then I realized it was a blessing in disguise. I needed to clean up my life, and this cleansing, though painful, brought lightness. I was left with few people around me, but genuine people. People who love me selflessly, who truly listen to me. And that's priceless. Sometimes we only understand the value of truth after everything falls apart. But when the dust settles, what remains standing is what truly matters. I had anxiety. Attacks during this process. Several. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a tight chest, a racing heart, afraid it would all happen again. I thought I was going crazy. But I learned to recognize my triggers, to respect my body, to slow down. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. But today I know I don't have to be strong all the time. I can ask for help. I can have bad days. The important thing is to never abandon myself again. Ever again. Because I did that for a long time. I put myself last, and it almost destroyed me. Never again. Social media, once just a place to post family photos, became a dangerous space during the crisis. Clara used it against me too. She made indirect posts, sowed doubts. Today, I use it differently. I share my reality, unfiltered. I talk about mental health, about disguised abusive relationships, about starting over. Not because I want followers, but because I know there are other women going through what I've experienced. And if my story reaches just one person and makes them open their eyes, it's worth it. We don't talk enough about this kind of violence, about how it can come disguised as care, concern, and I only want the best for you. But it is violence, yes. The other day, I found an old photo of Clara holding my son in her arms. They were both smiling, and I was overcome with immense sadness. Not for who she is today, but for who I thought she was. I truly loved her. I saw in her a sister I never had, and losing that was also a mourning. But now I can feel it without blaming myself. I truly loved. I was sincere. And if the other person wasn't, the problem isn't mine. I've learned not to bear the responsibility for what the other person chooses to do with the trust we give. It's liberating. Returning to work with full focus also helped me. I threw myself into projects, rediscovered myself professionally, and I was surprised by my own capabilities. For a long time, I thought I could only function with the validation of Claudio, my family, and others. Today, I'm enough. I'm proud of myself. When someone compliments me, I don't turn away. I appreciate it, and I accept it, because I fought hard to be here, and I deserve recognition. There's enormous pleasure in realizing that you've rebuilt your life with your own hands. Not because it was easy, but because you refused to stay at the bottom. There was a day when my youngest son hugged me before bed and said, "Mommy, I love you," smiling like that. That broke me, because I realized that even my smile had disappeared during that period. Clara not only messed with my head, but she erased parts of me, and I allowed it. But today, I've recovered. Not all of them, of course. There are still wounds, but there's so much more light, and that's what matters. My children are seeing their mother strong, standing tall, present. That's what I want them to take away from childhood, that you can fall, but you can also get back up. People still ask me if I regret exposing everything, breaking up with her, confronting my own husband. I answer with absolute certainty, no. I regret not having done it sooner, having pretended for so long that everything was fine. Pretending is tiring, and living in fear is even more tiring. Today, I sleep peacefully, not because everything is perfect, but because it's true, and that's priceless. Clara may have destroyed a lot, but she couldn't destroy who I am, and that's what gives me peace. Life went on, and so do I, with wounds, with marks, with stories to tell, but proud of who I've become. I'm not the same anymore, and thank goodness, because the woman I was didn't know how to protect herself. The woman I am today does, and she'll teach her children this. She'll teach them that love isn't control, that care isn't invasion, that loyalty has limits, that family isn't synonymous with submission, and that when we choose ourselves, the world changes. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. Maybe this is just one story among many, but for me, it was the hardest of my life, and telling it now with an open heart is a way of saying I won. Still scared, still in pain, still with some scars, but I won. And if you're going through something similar, I tell you with all the sincerity in the world, don't give up on yourself. It may take time, it may hurt, but you can get out, you can live again. And one day, you too will tell your story, just as I'm telling mine.